The most annoying part about sleep apnea can be its link with restless leg syndrome. And if you're not familiar with it, it is a awful condition where your legs just have sensations, even movement that make it really hard to get sleep for yourself, but also your partner. And it is something that it was even surprising to me of just how much restless leg syndrome there is in people with sleep apnea. In fact, it is 5 times higher in people with sleep apnea, 20% versus 4% in the general population, which is a huge problem because then restless legs plus sleep apnea leads to bad sleep and then makes those other conditions worse and just creates this downward cycle. So that's why in this episode, I want to talk about how we can deal with both, especially because restless leg syndrome, when you just throw a bunch of chemicals at it, it actually leads to refractory, which means those chemicals stop working. So that's why I did some research, found a lot of overlap into the mechanisms of restless leg syndrome and sleep apnea, so we could come up with some big solutions here today. And that's what we're going to highlight, the link between the two and what to do. And of course, this is not medical advice. This is for educational purposes only. But what is advice to you is to go ahead and subscribe so you stay up to date and help us get the message out to the world. Now, we're going to do a little bit of science. I'm sorry, we're getting to the action steps, but we got to understand like what the heck we're doing first. Otherwise, we're just like blindfolded and just kind of, throwing darts at the dark here. So, the biggest thing you need to understand about restless leg syndrome is that iron levels are low in the brain, then you cannot make as much dopamine, then your body's nervous system goes haywire. That's the simplest explanation of it. So then at night, you have that restlessness, the sensations, even some movement. That's what goes on. Now, we'll touch on these circles again, but it's just important to know these are the two main things. It's really three, but I wanted to make it simpler. And the other thing that's really hard about RLS, I'll start saying the acronym so I sound cool and official and save myself some time despite having to waste time there. RLS is a vicious cycle spiral. RLS is a downward spiral because the symptoms then make the brain physiology worse, make the symptoms worse, so on and so forth. So it's very hard to break. And on top of that, sleep apnea will directly make all these areas worse. So, for instance, hypoxia, when you stop breathing at night, oxygen levels go way low, damage happens. That is going to make iron levels in your brain even lower. Bad sleep is going to affect your dopamine signaling as well. And then, just by the sake of being woken up all the time and having poor sleep, that is going to put your nervous system in overdrive. And then, as a result, lead to more and more of those issues there. So again, that's how they just lead to each other. So that's why our three big targets in this are low brain iron, bad dopamine function, and nerves in overdrive, and of course, sleep apnea. So that's why we're going to cover those action steps right now. Okay, and then disclaimer number 2 or 3, I lose count nowadays. Number 1, fixing low brain iron. Okay, and I know I say that word weird. I'm fine with it. So I want to be very clear. It's very important to know it's a localized problem. You may have good iron stores throughout your body, but it's low in your brain. This means it is a issue with iron transport in distribution. This is somewhat similar to how there's enough food in the world to feed everyone, but there's world hunger because there's a poor channel of distribution. Now, if I'm totally wrong on that, that's fine. You can slay me in the comments. But that's what I've been told, and it looked good in paper, and I didn't look at it further. Nonetheless, what we need to understand is that iron has a little friend to help it transport across cells. So, for instance, when you absorb iron, you need copper to bring it into all these different little channels and pathways so it can go out into the blood and then be absorbed by other cells. Then in your liver, same thing. You need copper to help with the transport of iron through the cell and through the body. So same thing, you need copper to get it into the brain. Now, don't just run and go take copper and lick a penny. Don't do that. We got to explain a little bit more. Okay. But the main thing for you to understand, and I even came up with this really lame rhyme. And if you have a better rhyme, let me know in the comments, and then that would be grateful. But what I have here is that copper takes iron from 2 to 3, so it cruises with glee. So really stupid, but the idea is that it changes the oxidation status. Copper changes the oxidation status of iron that allows it to be moved around from transport proteins into the cell and to the body, all those different things, but only by changing its oxidation status from 2 to 3. Okay. And it rhymes. So that's how you remember it. That's how it works. And in fact, that's why the research has many case studies that people who are anemic right? They have low red blood cells, but they had good iron stores. If you give them copper, their red blood cells, which need iron in them, go to normal because copper was deficient and was not present in enough amounts to help with the transport of iron. So, now the other thing, because I didn't really mention it or highlight it very quickly, but is this protein hepcidin. So we'll go back to this ever so briefly. This will be painless, I swear. So hepcidin is something that prevents iron from moving around. Think of it like the anti-copper. Hepcidin is not a mineral, a metal, an atom. It's just a protein that will lock iron into a given place. Okay, it'll keep it inside of a cell. Doesn't want it to go anywhere. So in restless leg syndrome, it is elevated. So no matter how much iron you take, it's not going to go to where it needs to go. Very important. That's why a lot of times people with RLS, you get iron infusions. Well, if your hepcidin is elevated, it's not going to do anything. It's pointless. So that's why dealing with hepcidin is so important. Luckily, copper lowers hepcidin to allow for more transport. So that's how that works. And there's another thing that I'm going to talk about next that also lowers hepcidin even further. Now, for all of these, a certain ratio of these minerals is super, super important. So copper, let's say if you're at 2 to 4 milligrams per day, then zinc should be at a ratio of 16 to 32, just multiply it by 8. Roughly, that'll get you to where you need to go. Now, the research has shown that you need to have these minerals in a good balance and also a optimal timing because they compete with each other, or they also block the absorption of one another, or some of them activate different proteins in your body that will lead to the excretion. Like for instance, if you have a lot of zinc and that will upregulate a certain protein in your body that will actually excrete more copper. So you need a balance of all of these. And to help you remember this, funny story, real quick. They had a bunch of cows, they gave them a bunch of zinc, then they ended up making them copper deficient, then they gave them a bunch of copper, and they ended up making them very zinc deficient, and then they realized, wait, we need a balance of both. So same for you, don't be a research cow. Now for iron, there will be some intake of that will be based on you and your needs, but the whole idea is you want to have a balance of these, and it's going to be ideal to take them at separate times from each other because they will compete at an absorption level in your body. Now, something you shouldn't compete with is my segues into asking for a subscription, but here we go. You shouldn't compete with other YouTube channels and other things you want to watch. You should only want to watch my videos. I'm joking. I'm being facetious if you haven't caught on to that yet. But do click subscribe so you stay up to date as well, because I got lots of videos coming out all the time to help you in your journey with sleep apnea. And there's others out there. A lot of times in the comments, we're like, whoa, this is crazy. Never heard about that. Well, every single time you watch, you click like, you subscribe, that helps get that message out to other people. So please go ahead and click subscribe. Now, for number 2, this is an even bigger scientific apology. We're going to talk about repairing dopamine function. If you got to go like this, wake yourself up, now is the time. We're going to talk about receptor occupancy, really fun stuff here. So the thing that we don't really talk about very often is how we oversimplify how neurotransmitters work. You have a dopamine molecule, hits a dopamine receptor, everything works, everything's groovy. That's close, but no cigar. And cigars, I would recommend against if you have sleep apnea. So how they function is on a percentage of how many of the receptors are occupied. This is the receptor occupancy theory. And in this scenario, we have 10 receptors and 1 dopamine molecule. So that's 10%, but we need 40%. And stick with me, this will pay off. So to get to 40%, we would need to quadruple the amount of dopamine. 4 up here, 10 over there. It's kind of hard, go from 1 to 4. So if there is an easier way, like we have here, we have 2 and 5, then that is 40%, right? 2 divided by 5 is 40%. So that's what we want to go for, is being able to create this easier scenario like we have here. So how do we lower receptors? It's a bit counterintuitive. We lower dopamine receptors with big surges so when your body sees a ton of dopamine, it will actually delete some of these receptors in response. It doesn't want to get too much of a dopamine signal. It'll reduce it, and then we're back to that easy option here. So the whole reason I bring this up, in restless leg syndrome, we are in this scenario. We're stuck in this scenario. And it's really hard to quadruple the amount of dopamine, especially when your brain is not producing it very well. It's easier to get rid of these receptors, but it's catch-22. So how do we do that? So if we can spike dopamine, then we can achieve this. So this is where the cold comes in, and this is actually research backed. I'm not just telling you to hop into a cold tub because it's cool and health influencers tell you to do it. So cold leads to a massive dopamine increase. Here's a paper by a lot of last names that you would assume do nothing but have fun in the cold there. So in this study, they found this is the data reproduced, so it's a little bit easier to read. If you go into some cold water, this will increase dopamine massively. Huge. I think in the paper it was like 200, 250%. Now, using that mechanism, there's been 2 clinical trials on this because a lot of people think, well, what if we put pregnant women in cold water? It's a lot of where our research dollars are going to. But I mean, I'm glad this research is done because then I wouldn't be able to have any evidence to present to you. What they found is that you can dramatically reduce the symptoms of restless leg syndrome by like 50, 70% with just a few minutes of cold therapy. Now, cold therapy does not need to be going to a tub. And in fact, they found an effect just with applying cold packs to the legs for about 10 to 15 minutes before bed and wrap it in a cloth to save your skin. Now, the other big thing, the other reason this is going to be very effective is that cold reduces inflammation, and that's going to bring hepcidin down. Remember that it traps iron. And if we reduce hepcidin, then iron can make its way to the brain and help fix things. Now, the last one is nerves in overdrive, which I know me waving my hands around will help with that. Well, I guess problematically. Now, one of the biggest things that's a huge problem is when we interfere with dopamine by being a modern human in 2025. That's because every single time we pick up our phone and we're looking at something, we get a little bit of a dopamine hit. Not a huge one, like with cold, but a little bit of one. And we only go up and down ever so slightly. And we become addicted. And then we also get stuck in that bad receptor setup where we're looking to constantly always like get a little bit of a boost as opposed to getting rid of the receptors. Using a cell phone, etc., will also increase your cortisol, and then that will lead to your nervous system being more active and more feelings of restlessness in your legs. So that's why a nice little digital detox is a good idea. Now, I'll have this all on screen. I also have this in the guide really shortly. It can be really simple, just like getting rid of certain apps or having times of your day where no phones, like 2 hours before bed, 2 hours after getting up, or making sure every single time you open the phone, you're like, well, what do I actually want? What's a different way I can get that? So I'll have that all written out more extensively for you in this episode's free guide where we're talking about RLS and some other components related to that. And then, of course, if you want to address the sleep apnea more thoroughly with some good old fashioned tailored breathing exercises, that's what the sleep apnea reset protocol workshop is. And I'm not just giving you a video where it's me breathing for 5 minutes. Instead, it is a workshop designed to help you do a certain series of tests so that you're able to create your own best protocol for your breathing in your airways to optimize that. So you're breathing better, sleeping better, and feeling better, also reducing the symptoms of RLS because it's been shown that the less symptomatic you are with sleep apnea, the better RLS will be. So that is there for you. I'll have the button on screen. So for either of those as well, if you're on your phone, like a good chunk of you are, just click the title underneath this video and then the description box will pop up. If you're not on your phone, the description box is just underneath this video. Either way, you will click the link there. And for the sleep apnea reset protocol workshop, same thing. It'll be a link in the description. And then also there's some buttons. There was a button on screen. There's also a button below this video, just a little icon with the course there. And of course, if you're in the links and all that, I got your back. Want the guide, go to ochnow.com/RLS, or you can scan the QR code, get your phone, scan that thing, and yes, it will make that sound. Or you can go to ochnow.com/reset for the sleep apnea reset protocol workshop, or scan that QR code. And before you do that, just subscribe. Okay, last time. All right, everyone. So either way, you're a winner. You made it to this video. You're great. You're awesome. You're a champion of your health. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Dylan Peckus, and I'll see you soon.